Quick disclaimer. I usually don't push these episodes to the subscriber feed. I don't like to give you notifications in case you're not interested. But this episode is pretty tightly related to how I think of my kit on the whole. Not a follow-up, but related to this not a holy trinity video, sort of how I think about my Core 4 lenses in the context of travel. I just got back from New Zealand. I didn't pack all 4 of these, so I want to talk about that, how the travel was on the whole, maybe some tips about how to fly as a peasant in the economy class with no status, particularly if you're taking a camera bag with you like the f-stop Ajna, and getting your camera gear to your destination is one of your prime goals, like it was for me on this trip. If you're normally here for the nerdy YouTube analytics type stuff, next video's up, deep dives into videos, stick around until the end. I'll still squeak all of that in. Not much going on, obviously I haven't posted, so maybe it'll be a good look into what happens to a channel if you haven't posted a main video for 2 months. All right, let's roll it. Hey, welcome to the Upload Iceberg. If the upload is the content you see above the water as the viewer, I'll cover the journey and data behind growing a YouTube channel that you can't see in the murky depths below the surface. I'm Dan. This is episode lucky number 13 after hitting 3,700 subscribers on April 14th, 2024. I'm running pretty behind as usual. It's April 21st right now, and we're going to be jumping right into the juicy travel. I've gotten back from New Zealand. If editor Dan is on top of his game, he's been running some of the time lapses, and we're going to jump into what I brought, why I brought it, what I didn't bring, and how I feel about it coming back as a retrospective. And I think that'll be a good framework. At the start of the year, I made a video around my Core 4 lenses, that not a holy trinity video, and it's a good way to see how I think about my whole kit. And I think this trip, a big trip, is a good way to put that kind of mentality about how I curate my kit to the test, kind of look at those lined up. So that's why I think this will be a good framework. Justine at Bad Sloucher, fellow YouTube dabbler, was interested in what I didn't use especially. So I think that's a good framework to look at what I brought and what I used. And first I want to talk about the f-stop Ajna. That's the bag I took. I have an older version of the Talopa. That's a 50-liter pack. The Ajna is a 37. You probably could get the Talopa on a plane. I'm sure people probably do, but I just like to go a little bit smaller. A, for when I'm actually at my destination, hauling that around. If you're using public transport as well, that's really helpful. And B, I don't want to be anywhere close to that pack size limit for carry-on luggage. I also knew I wasn't doing super intense hiking on this trip. I knew we'd probably get into some good stuff, but nothing that would warrant maybe like the extra thick padded shoulder and hip belts of the Talopa specifically. So flying in general is pretty new to me from a photography standpoint. I started getting into photography around 2020 in like earnest and did some more domestic flying in the US leading up to that point, but probably only brought my RP on a plane twice in a very small camera bag beforehand. So this is only the Ajna's second trip on a plane. I generally like using the Ajna best with the slope medium ICU. It's a good compromise between having a lot of space for camera gear and having a good bit of space to pack other non-camera gear in the same pack. You can also see that the slope medium ICU allows some room behind it, and that's essential for me if I'm bringing the MacBook Pro. This I have in the padded sleeve, and I need a little bit behind this ICU to fit that kind of nicely in this bag. So if I'm thinking about like, I don't want to say commuter because I don't do a lot of commuting with this bag, but for general hauling, if I'm not really doing intense hiking and I need to bring my computer, this is kind of the configuration that works best for me and still allows me to pack a lot of camera gear, small stuff up toward the top here and deeper lenses can go down here. On this trip, it was a little trickier. Would have liked that room, but opted for the small Pro. And I brought the R6, the R8, the 2 small primes, the 28mm Pancake, the 50mm Nifty 50, and I brought the 2 F4 zooms. So those 2 are in my Core 4, that 24 to 105 and that 70 to 200, and some batteries and chargers, and I fit the GoPro in here as well. And a slim SD card carrier, that's extremely important, but I chose the small Pro to kind of limit myself on gear 1. I still brought a lot, but 2, so that I could pull this out of the bag if forced to check this bag underneath the plane. Under no circumstances was I going to check the camera gear in the small Pro ICU, so I wanted to make sure that that fit all the definitions of a personal item, and that on super long flights, if I had to put that at my feet, that I wouldn't be super frustrated with packing something down there that was too big and really uncomfortable for, something like a 13-hour flight leg. And right now, Editor Dan, I can put an overlay of what that top down looked like from the bag standpoint. But the entire goal, again, was to structure this bag, the Ajna as a whole, so that if I got screwed over and there was no overhead room, I can make sure I was prepared to get through the flight with the small Pro ICU in hand. Also, this portion has to be carried on as it had all my spare lithium ion batteries. I would say generally I was a little bit worried about having this as a carry-on, a little bit paranoid. If you have status or you can board at a higher boarding group, if you have pre-check, if you have global entry, a trip like this will just be less stressful overall in the airport. But I have none of that. This was my first time flying with United, didn't have their credit card. So for me, this trip was sort of hostile conditions for a carry-on bag. And I wanted to make sure that I could pull out this small Pro ICU and keep that with me in the worst case where I couldn't fit this as carry-on luggage overhead. So what I did was tie the Peak Design slide light strap to the handle of the small Pro ICU, just with some bungee ties. That was helpful because if I got separated from this bag for a long period of time, this small Pro ICU was kind of dense and heavy. So I wanted something to be able to carry that from my shoulder if needed, like in a long-term situation. Also, like in a super worst case scenario, if for whatever reason the checked Ajna got lost, I would have something to carry camera gear around, even if that meant carrying this from a shoulder strap while hiking. So that was one of the things I had. Also had 2 trusty capture clips. Like I said, I brought 2 bodies and planned on some of the hiking to shoot with both of them. So had a capture clip on each shoulder. I also, the ICUs, if you're not familiar, the ICUs on the f-stop bags and probably in most Velcro in, so they're nice and secure. I made sure not to Velcro the ICU in for this trip so that, again, if I had to check this outer bag, I could kind of pull that ICU out relatively quickly and easily. Kind of painless because, if I had to check it, I didn't want to go through a massive hassle of taking time to undo that, particularly if I had to do so quickly. If you're worried about size, this 37 liter, and probably anything similar for other manufacturers, is just about the right size for airline regulations, maybe an inch longer in some scenarios, but I would say quite a bit smaller than half of people's carry-on luggage. There's all those people that try to fit way too much in their bag and they cause a scene trying to get it overhead. Frankly, I find that a little bit inconsiderate, but if you have something like this, I think you're going to be flying under the radar, even if it's a little bit outside the strict regulations. So I wouldn't worry about that too much with something like the f-stop Ajna. For this back pouch, I kind of leave that open so that I can put my rain shell in it when needed. That's what I wear on the plane and in the airport. I skipped bringing this computer as much as I would have liked it on the trip. Just felt risky, kind of too big, too fragile. I knew if I had to check this bag and this became my personal item, the computer, I'd be trying to put that amongst other people's luggage, maybe slip it in somewhere. Just not the thing I want to trust other people to handle overhead. Something that would be difficult maybe to keep eyes on during the flight. So didn't want to risk bringing this. I use it for everything all day. So as much as I would miss it on the trip, kind of pretty essential that I have this here at home and working when I come back. My 311 bag, cord Ziploc, I'd put in the very top pouch. Never took it out during security. As long as you're not pressing the size limits of bottles, I don't think anybody really bothers taking that out too often anymore. And then the rest of the stuff in the bag when walking around the airport was stuff that I'd rather not check and I wanted with me. But if I was forced to check this bag, was not as essential as the ICU. So for me, that was headphones, snacks, water bottle, one outfit change. You probably want an outfit change for travel this long. We got delayed right out of the gate for a full 24 hours. So I was definitely thankful to have mine while I could leave my checked bag with the airline. Going through security with this, my strategy was kind of toss the jacket, the boots, hat, phone, passport, boarding pass into one bin. And then I would chuck this bag into another bin, at first without opening it at all or taking anything out. You've always kind of got that one TSA worker that's corralling bins or yelling at people. So if I could catch them at a quiet moment, I'd kind of say, hey, this bag is pretty densely packed. I've got 3 cameras, 4 lenses, bunch of batteries. It usually goes through just fine, but I'm happy to take it all out now if you want. And I think policies are all over the place depending on airport. It probably depends on the agent, depends on the countries. But I found that if I just said something quickly and politely and sounded confident that I knew exactly what was in the bag, what was densely packed, and that it would go through, they would just let it go through. It's in their best interest to kind of keep everything moving. Now, if you know your bag is going to flag, like if things are too densely packed, if you have a computer covering your ICU, if they can't see what's inside of your bag, and they're going to pull it anyway. So, it's not, you might as well just start unpacking it at the beginning. If you think you don't have to unpack it, everybody wants to put that bag through without taking stuff out. So that worked 6 out of 7 flights for me. The seventh guy I kind of hemmed and hawed and did make me pull it all out. Again, probably something, I don't know exactly the rules of TSA pre-check, probably something that you can skip completely if you sign up for that. If you're like me, you don't fly that often, and you're pretty well within the limits of what the airline allows, I would just try to push it through. Next time I fly, I might not even mention what's in there. I might just try to push it through. Like I said, if their view is blocked, if they can't see things, they're going to pull it out anyway. But to the extent that you don't have to pull out all these cameras and lenses for 7 flights on one trip, it's to everybody's advantage to keep stuff moving. So if you're flying economy, one of the base levels, there are some other ways that you can ensure your whole bag gets checked. For United, I think it's called Premier Access. So I paid, I don't know, for one of the flights, like $50, for another $30 to just bump your boarding group right before, right after priority boarding, right before, the mass group that gets on the plane. That will all but really ensure that you have space by the time you get on. And it's not that expensive. So if it's really important to you, that's an option. I definitely didn't do that for every flight. There was a flight where they were so limited on space, they called that out. I think it was our San Francisco to O'Hare leg. My brother courtesy checked his bag that he didn't need during the flight. They gave him increased boarding priority in exchange for doing that early. And then he carried my camera bag on. So that's one of the hacks you can use potentially if you're traveling in a group. And then this is something I could have researched before, but Air New Zealand has a 15-pound carry-on limit for bags. So I didn't realize this until last minute. Flying from the North Island to the South Island, I wasn't really prepared. So what I did was just, again, pull that small Pro ICU as my personal item. There's no weight limit on that. And then I checked my Ajna for that flight. Coming back from the South to North Island, I was more prepared for that, obviously. So I just pared down what was in this bag. I still pulled out the small Pro ICU because this would have made the bag itself well over 15 pounds. So I pulled out the small Pro ICU. That was my personal item. There's no weight limit on that. That went on my feet. And then I just put this overhead. And that was fine. It's not ideal because you've got to carry both of them separate. And then one last thing to note maybe is that I had air tags on everything. So air tag in the small Pro ICU, air tag in the Ajna itself, knowing that those would probably be separated for some of the legs of my journey. And then I put one in my luggage. And these offer just a little peace of mind. They give you one more option of recourse if things do get lost. You can rely on the airline to tell you where your bags are and how they're lost, or you might get a ping from iPhone devices. It's relatively cheap to buy a pack of 4. If they ever save you on something like a lost bag, they pay for themselves numerous times over. So I find it, I can rely on the airline to tell me where my bags are. If you put in the air tags, at least you have a chance at having one other location that you kind of control and can see. So I think that's probably worth it. Then the other thing I brought was the Peak Design travel tripod. I didn't bring this in the Ajna itself. I put this in my checked luggage, which in retrospect was a little risky. I have a 45, it's the previous generation of this, a 45-liter duffel, soft, and it's a little bit more suited to keeping that tripod than I think this shape is. No strong feelings on this bag in particular. I haven't used it, but the previous version is great for travel. And I put this along one side of that bag. I did put it in the carrying bag that this comes with, which offers a little padding. And then my checked bag was pretty densely stuffed. And so I didn't expect things to shift around. So I felt good about that. Also, this is pretty durable. I'm not really worried about this getting tossed around. Side note, I love Peak Design. I love the ecosystem. I don't really recommend buying this tripod. I think there are a lot of other options for less than $650 at this point now. That said, this does fit perfectly in the side pocket of the Talopa. So for me, I've never thought really about selling it to try to buy a cheaper tripod and pocketing some of the money. The form factor is perfect for that bag. And so I'll probably, this is something that has worked really well for me, and I'll ride it till I die, even though it was a little bit more expensive. The other thing that went into my checked luggage was the RF 100 to 400. And like I said, this bag was packed tightly, and I wrapped that lens in this hoodie. So I felt really good, really safe about that. The reason I say packing those in the checked luggage was risky, and probably not as much for the 100 to 400 in retrospect, looking through my Lightroom catalog and editing, I probably could have skipped that lens for a trip like this. I would have been upset about the tripod, because if I hadn't had the tripod, I didn't really go into this trip planning a lot of astro, but the skies were great. We had a couple days around the new moon. where the weather was really good and there was a lot of tries at Astro and it's just really, really dark. So I think I didn't really have a plan other than hope that the bag didn't get lost. Obviously, it would have been a bummer on a trip like this to not have the stuff that you needed, but particularly for that tripod, my plan would have been to, pick up something cheap and maybe leave it there or, I don't know what, but I think if there's a way to get that tripod on the Ajna and have that still work well in overhead bins, that might be the play, but it would make this considerably bulkier and you don't have to carry that weight around the airport, even though it's relatively light for a tripod. It's best to skip it. So I don't know. No regrets, everything made it, but it would have been a big bummer if this was in a checked bag. My checked bag was lost or delayed because I used this tripod for Astro and used it for a lot of time lapses, like you saw. I wasn't planning on shooting much Astro. I wasn't planning on shooting many time lapses. As you saw, I kind of shot a lot of them. Our Airbnb, the views from our Airbnb were good. So a lot of times I just wanted to keep one camera running, taking some pictures on a timer so that, if I took enough of those and enough of them turned out well, I could turn them into something nice from a content or video perspective. So the things that I didn't pack, first up was the R6 battery grip. It didn't make it. And I'll admit that I missed using this in practice, not dearly, but this, I think I've said before, lives on my R6 pretty much the entire time. I just like having it on. I like the extra grip. Obviously love the double battery. You never really have to think about it running out. It can be a little cumbersome hiking while in the capture clip. So that was one reason. The other reason was just, that Pro Small ICU doesn't discriminate. You really got to pare down your gear to fit everything in there. And this was just something that I could kind of easily do without, knowing that I was going to be shooting some video with the iPhone. That works really well just because clips are naturally a little bit stabilized. And I knew I was bringing the R8. So with two cameras, just a lot less worried about battery life in general. I did take all 3 extra batteries, but they were more packable, not in this form factor. You can kind of slip them in anywhere. This battery grip has also been discontinued in the last couple months, if you haven't seen or I haven't mentioned. So if you would like to get one new, I would probably get on that sooner rather than later. The other thing that I mentioned that I didn't bring was the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Just too big, fragile. If I were to separate it from the Ajna, I was just a little bit worried about that. Also didn't need it strictly for a trip like this. I would have liked to have had a device to back up some files mid-trip, but this is probably overkill for that function on a trip. I think this is something much more suited for a MacBook Air. Instead of regrets about not bringing this, it's more of regrets. Do I have regrets selling the initial M1 MacBook Air back to Apple for a trade-in when I could have used it on a trip like this? And I gave that some thought, but not really. I got a great trade-in for that. I think $500 on the original $999. So, having a MacBook Pro and then having a MacBook Air just around for trips, I don't travel enough for that. It would be collecting dust most of the time. So that's something to consider. I also, maybe I can make a follow-up review on this computer, but would a 14-inch MacBook Pro make this trip? For me, again, no. And do I have regrets on the 16-inch after going on this trip and having to leave it behind? Also, no. I think the screen is gorgeous and really helpful working generally. Oftentimes, I don't even plug in this second monitor. That includes even video editing. So when I'm in Premiere, a lot of times I'm just using this 16-inch screen. I basically love everything about it. The downside is it's big and heavy, but I'm not going to bring it on a trip like this. So if you're considering a new computer and you travel a lot and you'll need to bring it on your travels, I think that's where you should spend a lot of time evaluating, maybe even more than some of the specs. Obviously, the specs are important. There's a lot to choose through with Apple Silicon and how much RAM to pair which chip with. At the same time, if you need to travel with these machines, I would really spend a lot of time considering whether you need an Air, whether you need a Pro, and then if you go Pro, how to differentiate for yourself between the 14 inches and 16 inches. Because the 14-inch computer, I've never had hands on, but compared to an Air, it's still going to be fairly unwieldy. So those are the things that I would be choosing between if looking at some of these machines and you're someone who's doing travel content. So no regrets here. I think for me, the ultimate pairing would be something like an iPad mini with a storage bump, perhaps. Something, assuming that I could dump some raw files directly into the file system of that, I think that would be a good way to go. I probably wouldn't do much editing on that iPad mini. For all the instances around the house when I don't want to be moving around the MacBook Pro or using the MacBook Pro, I think I would use the mini a lot at home and on the go. So I think that would be a good pair. Now, the other two things that didn't make it were the weather sealed primes. So this Sigma 28mm and this Samyang 85mm. And I go on and on about wanting these weather sealed primes. So why didn't I bring them? And for a good amount of time, I considered bringing those two and maybe the 70 to 200, kind of shooting the trip like that, mostly prime with that 70 to 200 reach. I don't regret it because I'm looking through the catalog. I like what I have. I'm happy with how the shooting experience was as well. But I think having the challenge of one wide, tight prime would have been really fun on a trip like this. I think as I considered that as a possibility, I just got cold feet when comparing it to something like the 24 to 105 that I've already taken Ireland, that I use all the time, that I know is just so much more versatile. It just feels like a lot less commitment to pack that. Again, even though it's not necessarily exciting to go that route. But I'm very glad I did. Some downsides for the 28 and 85 on a trip like this: no image stabilization. So particularly not the best pair maybe with the R8 itself. And instead of these two, like I said, I brought the 28mm Pancake and the 50mm Nifty 50. Not ideal trades for these two lenses. I'd prefer to have brought these two, but pretty damn good for how much smaller they are. And again, overall, I'd say no regrets on these. I would have liked the Sigma 28 for Astro. I think it would have been nice to get some of those shots at an f1.4, at an f2. It's a little finicky to dial in manual focus for the 28 Pancake and the 50mm. Those two small primes both did fine. These are probably the darkest skies that I've encountered. So it was actually cool to use the 50 for something like the Milky Way, but it would have been cool to have that 28. And then I think when I boil it down to experiences, particularly for something like the Milford sound, it would have been really nice to have that weather sealed 85. Last time I used this pretty extensively was that Colorado trip, and I just love the look of what I got there. If I look through the Lightroom catalog for New Zealand right now, I'm not super happy with some of like the portrait stuff. And I think that's where I really just like that fast 85. I like this in landscape to try to get, obliterate some of those foreground elements in an out of focus fashion. It's just neat to play with it in that way. It gives subjects kind of that magical pop. And I think that would have been really cool in kind of the misty Milford trip back on the boat. So still got a lot of great pictures there, but they were mostly that 24 to 105 and 70 to 200 once it started to rain, obviously. Would have been nice to have that 85. The other thing I ditched were the mist filters. So I brought a 10-stop ND and I brought a circular polarizer as kind of thinking landscape heavy. Those are the two things that I might want to include the most. And I put those not in the filter case that I have, but kind of on this front flap, there's a small pocket that can fit about two filters. And so I put them there with the step-up ring. I missed having the mist filters. This was also a trip where it was just nice to kind of shoot clean images and have, not apply anything artistic in camera just in case. Again, I don't know. The stakes just feel higher. It's potentially a once in a lifetime thing just to get those directly off the lens generally, minus maybe the circular polarizer. Not that I use that all the time. It just felt like the way I wanted to go if I needed to pare down the number of filters. In terms of things that I hit pretty hard, the R6 with IBIS and dual card slots. Again, thinking about a trip that might be a once in a lifetime, I just naturally gravitate toward that. Much better for quick video clips if you're taking those and that you're going to have a copy, which is particularly important if you don't have a computer to back things up to. So it's not that the R8 performed poorly. It's not that I lost a card, but when you're there, knowing that you have things in duplicate, I don't know, that just gives me a lot of peace of mind and heavily relied on it. Also, it's a better grip. So when hiking, if you don't necessarily have that wrist strap on all the time, I'm just a little bit more comfortable with the R6 still. I've used it for a couple more years than the R8. And so it just feels more comfortable. I prefer to shoot with that. Probably use that a good bit more than the R8, but still have some good shots on the R8. I also use the R8 in a fashion where I'd only put on the Pancake or only put on the Nifty 50. And that was the only camera I'd bring for, half a day, a period of the day. That was really cool. And I'm really glad I brought the R8. So it didn't feel like I had one camera sitting collecting dust. I definitely used both, but for moments where I was only using one, I definitely opted for IBIS and dual cards. So that was a really good experience to reinforce that for my next main camera, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't want to skate by with one card. Pretty sure I wouldn't want to ditch IBIS to go small. I'd rather have those two things and carry a bigger body. And again, despite being boring, the rest of the trip shot a lot on the 24 to 105 and the 70 to 200. Weather sealed, IS, zoomable, which when you're on things like a boat is really helpful. Like you just can't move your feet sometimes. And so knowing that you have that framing, how you like it in camera, as opposed to, thinking you have it and then cropping around later. I don't know, just zooming to find that frame is easier for me to conceptualize sometimes when you're in environments where you don't have a lot of control over your feet and positioning to begin with. And they're also super packable. They're tiny, they fit in the bag nice for what they are. Overall, no regrets going the f4 zoom route over the 2 prime route. And then the 28mm Pancake came in pretty clutch here because it was one, nice to use with the R8, get that small package when I only wanted to carry that. The 50 was good for that as well, but the 28 specifically was great for Astro. Used it quite a bit. Also used the 50, like I said, it was dark enough to use the 50 for Astro, but in some places it won't be dark enough to use the 50 nicely without, doing a lot of stacking or bringing a star tracker. So to have the fast 28, to have it be so small, and to have that be the answer to the wide, fast Astro lens, I think is really valuable because it's pretty good on distortion. The edges of the frames and the stars look pretty good on it. And typically, if you're shooting those things, it's going to be clear skies. It's not going to be raining. You don't necessarily want anything weather sealed. Don't need it, rather. So I think this is a great travel option for people who want to shoot the stars, but don't necessarily want to plan anything else in their kit around shooting the stars. That's kind of what I walked into on this trip, and super glad that this came along. And the other thing that I used, but not a ton, was that 100 to 400. I think I got a couple good shots when I used it, but could have done without it. I would have really liked to have rented the 100 to 500 for the Milford day specifically. I think to have a weather sealed telly for that kind of day, to have a little bit more reach for picking out features of mountains. Slight regret that I didn't maybe plan that a little bit better to rent that. I think that would have been fun. There's a lot less wildlife running around in New Zealand than you might think. We did see, driving to Milford Sound, we did see Kia, kind of these mountain parrots. It was aggressively trying to get into the car in front of us. And in the back seat, I had the 24 to 105 on. Unfortunately, not the 70 to 200 at the time, or the 100 to 400. So could only get a shot that was, so close, and lost focus as it took off, which was unfortunate as well. But, I think unless you kind of seek out some of the wildlife, it's not, it doesn't feel like shooting fish in a barrel sometimes like Colorado does when you're just driving around aimlessly and see a bunch of stuff. And again, I think that experience of having the 100 to 400 and maybe not utilizing it all the time or not utilizing it fully, just reinforces some of my thoughts about what I ultimately want long-term on the tele end. So overall, pretty great trip. I would recommend it if you get the chance. If you can split lodging and some food and some gas, 3-4 ways amongst a couple people, at least if you're coming from the US dollar, it's pretty cheap once you're there. I don't know that you can get around the cost of getting there. That's the expensive part. But once you're there, if you're being smart, you can live fairly cheaply, and that's great news because this is a trip that you're going to want to spend at least 2 weeks, I would think, for after taking the time to get there and to take the time to adjust. Milford Sound, if you haven't seen geography like this, I would highly recommend. Definitely one of the highlights for me on this trip. I could have done another day or two hiking in this area as well, maybe even taking a second boat cruise. Very cool stuff here. The thing that I would recommend is just making sure to take some moments where you're just soaking it in without looking through your lens the whole time. If you're into astrophotography, I would definitely plan some compositions, plan out some locations. I think if I was doing this solely as a photo trip, I would have spent a lot of time in photo pills, planning some of that stuff out, driving around at night and trying to make some of that happen, because probably one of the darkest places that you're going to get to. And when the weather cooperates, it's hard not to want to take full advantage of that in the moment. As far as upcoming videos, like stuff that I want to create coming out of this trip, I didn't really have a strong plan going in by design. This was more of a family vacation than a photo-specific trip. Like sometimes the Colorado trips will feel like I've covered the 24 to 105 and 70 to 200 to death. I'm not quite sure what I'll say about those for this trip. So maybe I do something a little bit more narrative, but try to, still borrow the traffic off of those search terms, still hit on some of the same points, reiterate that the thesis is maybe, they're not always the most exciting to put in the bag, but when you have them in the bag and you have them on the trip, you will likely be thankful, if you fall into this landscape or travel type photographer profile. The other video I want to make is probably, a final verdict on the R8 or 28mm, maybe both together again, sort of like I've done here, just to weigh in on some of the things that I've learned since this video. All in all, like spoiler, great camera, like impressive photo first. I think this is one of the shining stars of the Canon lineup right now. The weak sides are going to be short video clips, all around content creation. Not sure if it's the best for, though. It's a pretty serviceable, still camera if you set it up for long form. My battery just ran out. I think the first one lasted about 56 minutes room temp. So it's hard to say, but if the R8 was around when I first bought the RP, I'm not sure I would have felt the need to jump up to the R6 for some of the stuff that I was doing. Over time, I think I still would have missed some of the same things. Dual card slots for shooting freelance work definitely would have been gnawing at me. Like, I just don't like having that risk. And IBIS and some more robust weather sealing, obviously great to have and things that I value, but there's some of that on the R8, and having increased weather sealing of something like the R6 is nice, in addition to 3 dials, but I definitely could have done a lot of damage with the R8 for a really long time. Whereas with the RP, for some of the stuff I was doing, I didn't absolutely love it. And, that was a camera that was weak on 4K recording for sure. And like I said in this review, not a camera that I plan to keep. I'm not sure what I'll do with the 28mm Pancake. I might keep that around, but shooting this video right now with the Sigma 28. So I have duplicate 28s. I don't want 2 28s, and eventually long term we'll probably replace them with the zoom at some point, right? That's kind of a conundrum that I've had on this channel and I've talked about at length. So not sure if I'll keep both around. I think it probably makes sense to sell the R8 with the 28mm, but we'll see. I just want to kind of wrap this up and have this review and thoughts tidied up and available for myself so that I can sell this if needed. And not planning to put the proceeds of that sale directly into anything in a hurry, most likely just into rentals and or travel. Really not sure what I want to do from a body perspective, or if I want to stick with a second Canon body. I plan to run the R6 to the ground and keep those F4 zooms for a really long time. Like I said, from a photography standpoint, really, really happy with how those work for me and can imagine using those for a really long time. They're weaker on the video front. There's obviously gripes I have with Canon's lineup, but that stuff's not going anywhere. And Canon might clear up some of those holes pretty shortly here. I know they're going to, everyone's watching for the R5 Mark II. What other cameras come out in May? Hopefully some lenses. If nothing else, hopefully a lens roadmap. This gets a little bit more into news. But one of the things that was frustrating on this trip was not having a 51.4, right? Like, it would have been cool. Not that I necessarily might run out and buy it, but having a weather sealed 50 would have been really nice to have instead of the nifty 50 and 28mm. Like, I probably, knowing that I had dark enough skies, a 51.4 prime that was weather sealed, would have loved that for this trip. Toward the end of the trip, or right after I got back, Sony announced this 16-25 f2.8, which, again, another lens that I would love to see Canon offer. I think people look at this and it's kind of weird, right? You're losing a lot of range off of that Trinity lens. You're not getting all the way to 35, which is a length that people love. At the same time, to save at least $1,000 off of a lens like a Trinity lens, and to really cover the wide end. Again, this feels short, but this covers a lot. This would be great for Astro. 25 is a little too wide for my preference on talking head, but it would work for that. And just being in this small, compact form factor and having that quality at this price, I think this is super compelling. The 24-50, the lens in kind of the similar footprint, similar pricing, that's also really interesting. I'd love to see those on Canon. If you're only here for the trip, that's pretty much it. We can jump into some YouTube analytics. So this milestone period is from March 24th, 2024 through 4/20. If you're new, we like to look at that last 28-day period when we open up analytics and start off these episodes. The thumbnail today will be something about a New Zealand landscape that maybe has a little bit broader appeal because I intend to push this episode to the subscriber feed. In the benchmarked analytics period, you can see views are relatively flat, and we haven't produced a main video in something like, this was the last one, February 18th. So 2 full months, meaning it's probably good to zoom out to this 90-day here just to see a little bit more of what's going on. And it's pretty flat. A little bit of a spike when these last couple videos came out, but no continuing residual views from them, seemingly, which is not great. It's not what you want to see. And maybe a little hit starting here, but pretty flat. And that's kind of how my channel works. That's by design. It feels good that your channel doesn't die when you take a trip or a break this long. At the same time, it's not exciting necessarily either. And we're still running kind of that 1,400 views in the last 48 hours. I didn't check analytics much on the trip at all. So no clue really where that was. All I did was answer a few comments that came through while on the trip. But this is probably about where this was when I left. The views for this period, if we go back to 28 days, about 20,000 or 725 views per day, down from 800 in the previous period. Watch hours at 905, down about 100 hours from the previous period that we looked at. Subscribers, This is about normal, maybe a few less than the last episode where we looked at subscribers. And when I don't have a video popping off, this fluctuates a little, but this is pretty normal. The click-through rate was interesting. This went up more than a whole point to close to 9. Not really sure what's happening there, but not super interested to dive into it necessarily. Again, this varies depending on what's getting shown. I haven't come out with any new videos, obviously. So if older videos with typically higher click-through rates maybe have been shown more in this last 28 days, this average obviously will rise up. And then same with videos that maybe have a lower, maybe they're getting shown less. It's possible that some videos are getting shown to a more fitting audience and the click-through rates are actually increasing on those videos, but not something that I'm really interested in taking super deep dive into. And average view duration about the same as when we last left off. AdSense. The average is the same as last time, $270 per day. We had a high of, that's probably it, $3.74 and a low of $1.73 for a total of $75.76 in the last 28 days. If we see here, March is $86.34. If I remember correctly, that's probably one of the highest months ever on the channel. Yeah, that's one of the highest months that I've ever had. So that's kind of cool that we might be flirting with the $100 month here in 2024. But again, I think that is a consequence of CPM, RPMs going up pretty dramatically since this low point started 2023, largely, I believe. So just keep an eye on that. Again, funny money. You never want to count on AdSense, but would be cool to break 100 for a month. I've had no videos in this period. So nothing to say on that front down here on the timeline. And for camera news, the only thing I had notes on, Canon's coming out shortly here with some new stuff. So, more details are coming out. Everyone's getting excited. But personally, I'm looking to see some timelines. I'm looking to see more lenses than the cameras. I'm not really in the immediate market for an expensive camera. Wish I was, but I'm not. So R5 II, nothing that's going to land on my plate in the next month when it comes out. That's for sure. I don't even know when they launch. Hopefully soon. Excited to see. And hopefully some lenses alongside. I think that's what I'm excited to see is Canon, where are you committing resources? The lens lineup, there's a big hole in the middle. It hasn't been addressed, and it's not been addressed third party. So eager to see what happens there. I haven't seen much coverage coming out of NAB. I'm sure there's plenty. I just haven't seen any. So I'm not sure what the most exciting stuff there is. That Sony lens, this is the other piece of gear that I saw by chance and intrigued. That's what I'll say about that for now. And that's all I've got today. If you're new, keep your eye out. Like I said, I don't release these podcast episodes to subscribers. I don't think they have mass appeal. And so I want to keep these, concentrated to the group that's seeking them out. If you are interested, I make a new episode every 100 subs, and we'll do that until we hit 5,000. So I'll see you at 3,800 if this is new and you liked it. The best way to support this show is to treat yourself to a rental at Lensrentals. You can get 15% off using this link and my code. That's great if you're looking for something to take on a trip that might otherwise be outside of your budget, so to get hands-on for that for a short period, for a job, obviously, or, if you want to evaluate a bigger purchase. That's why I rented the 70-200 f2.8 at the same time that I purchased the F4, just to kind of double check my purchase, make sure I was in the right place, just in case I wanted to swap and reverse that decision. So those are all the good reasons that you could rent, and it greatly helps the channel. If you'd like to make this show more valuable to you, drop comments, whether on the episodes themselves or on the regular videos. I like to incorporate any additional feedback or questions, particularly if it's relevant and I can pull it into one of these topics. Doing so is a good way to structure episodes around. And so if they fit nicely, I'll pull them in. That's great to do. Stay tuned for more New Zealand pictures when I emerge from my Lightroom dungeon. And until then, later.